The din of the restaurant washed over me like waves against a shore. Clattering plates, murmured conversations, the hiss of steam from the kitchen. I moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing 3 plates on my left arm while my right hand steadied a 4th. My feet ached in the mandatory black heels that pinched my toes after 8 hours of rushing back and forth across polished marble floors. "Table 7 needs more bread," Marco, the floor manager, barked as I passed him. I nodded, biting back the urge to remind him that I was already juggling 4 entrees that needed to be delivered while they were still hot. But arguing with Marco was pointless. 6 months at Bellissimo had taught me that much. "Right away," I murmured, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The truth was, I needed this job more than Marco needed me. The stack of medical bills waiting in my apartment was reminder enough. My mother's cancer treatments weren't going to pay for themselves, and the insurance only covered so much. So I swallowed my pride, delivered the steaming plates to table 12, and fetched more bread for table 7. The Friday night rush at Bellissimo was always intense, a high-end Italian restaurant in the heart of the city that catered to those who could afford to drop $300 on dinner without blinking. The wealthy, the powerful, and occasionally, according to whispers among the staff, those whose money came from means best not discussed in polite company. "Emma!" Marco snapped his fingers at me. "VIP table, corner booth, just arrived." I suppressed a groan. VIP tables meant demanding customers with exacting standards, and Marco breathing down my neck to ensure everything was perfect, but they also meant better tips, and I desperately needed every extra dollar I could get. "On it," I said, straightening my black button-down shirt and smoothing down the apron tied around my waist. I grabbed fresh water glasses and menus, taking a deep breath before making my way to the corner booth, the most private in the restaurant, partially concealed behind a decorative stone partition and flanked by lush potted plants. The moment I approached, I felt it. A shift in the air, as if the oxygen had suddenly grown heavier. 3 men in dark suits occupied one side of the booth, their broad shoulders and watchful eyes marking them immediately as security of some kind. But it was the woman seated alone on the other side who caught my attention. She was elegant, in her 60s perhaps, with silver-streaked dark hair swept into a flawless updo. Her dress was simple, but clearly expensive, a deep burgundy that complemented her olive skin. Diamond earrings caught the light as she turned her head, studying the restaurant with curious eyes. "Good evening," I said, placing the water glasses on the table. "Welcome to Bellissimo. My name is Emma, and I'll be—" The woman smiled politely, but made no indication she'd heard me. One of the suited men leaned forward. "Ms. Ricci doesn't hear," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent. "She reads lips, but only in Italian." "Oh." I paused, momentarily flustered. Then, without thinking, my hands moved in front of me, fingers forming the signs that had become second nature after years of communicating with my younger cousin who was born deaf. "Hello, I'm Emma. I'll be your server tonight. Welcome to our restaurant." The transformation in the woman's face was immediate. Her eyes widened, lighting up with surprise and delight. Her hands moved rapidly in response. "You sign. How wonderful. No one ever signs to me here. My son usually has to translate everything." I smiled, the genuine warmth of human connection cutting through my exhaustion. "I learned from my cousin. Not perfect, but I practice." Her hands flew gracefully. "Your signing is beautiful. What do you recommend tonight?" As I signed back about the evening's specials, describing the handmade ravioli and the pan-seared sea bass, I became aware of a prickling sensation along my spine, the unmistakable feeling of being watched intently. I glanced up, and my heart stuttered in my chest. A man had appeared behind the booth, tall and commanding, dressed in an immaculately tailored charcoal suit that did nothing to conceal the powerful build underneath. He couldn't have been more than 35, with dark hair cropped short on the sides but longer on top, and a strong, clean-shaven jawline that could have been carved from marble. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Dark as midnight, they were fixed on my hands with an intensity that made me falter mid-sign. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something that sent a ripple of unease through me. The suited men immediately shifted, making room as the newcomer slid into the booth beside them. The woman, Ms. Ricci, noticed my distraction and turned. Her face softened into a smile of recognition as she signed rapidly to him. "Luca, look! My waitress knows sign language. She's been telling me about the menu." The man, Luca, didn't take his eyes off me as he responded to his mother in flawless sign language, his large hands moving with surprising grace and fluidity. "Is that so?" The way he stared made me feel transparent, as if he could see every secret I'd ever kept. I shifted my weight, suddenly conscious of my worn black shoes, the small coffee stain on my sleeve I'd tried to scrub out that morning, the fact that I'd pulled my hair into a hasty bun because I hadn't had time to wash it. "I didn't know many people in this city knew Italian Sign Language," he said aloud, his voice deep and smooth with just a hint of an accent, like aged whiskey poured over ice. "Where did you learn?" "American Sign Language, actually," I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. Something told me this wasn't a man accustomed to being corrected. "My cousin is deaf. I learned growing up. Italian Sign Language is different, but there are enough similarities that we can understand each other." Ms. Ricci signed something else to her son, too quick for me to catch all of it, but I understood enough to know she was asking about me. Luca's response was measured, his dark eyes never leaving my face. "She seems interesting." The woman's expression brightened, and she signed to me again. "You must join us. Sit, talk with me while we eat. It's so rare I find someone who can communicate with me directly." "Mother," Luca said aloud, a note of warning in his voice, though his hands remained still, my cheeks flushed with heat. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm working. There are other tables." What's your name?" Luca asked, cutting me off. "Emma," I replied, the word barely audible over the sudden pounding of my heart. "Emma Foster." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Impossible. Someone like him wouldn't know someone like me. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing how my name felt on his tongue. "Tell Marco you'll be exclusively attending to our table tonight." It wasn't a request. "I don't think it won't be a problem," he said with quiet certainty. As if on cue, Marco appeared at my elbow, his usually stern expression transformed into one of deferential respect, bordering on fear. "Mr. Ricci," he said, his voice pitched higher than normal, "is everything to your satisfaction?" Ricci. The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in the city knew that name, even if they pretended not to. The Ricci family owned half the waterfront district and had fingers in every major business in town. Their legitimate enterprises were impressive enough, but the whispered rumors about their other activities were what made people lower their voices when they spoke the name. And I'd just been correcting Luca Ricci's Italian. "Emma will be taking care of my mother tonight," Luca said to Marco. "Exclusively. That won't be an issue, will it?" Marco's eyes darted to me, then back to Luca. "Of course not, Mr. Ricci. Emma is one of our best. I'll reassign her other tables immediately." Before I could protest, Marco was gone, scurrying away like a startled mouse. Ms. Ricci beamed at me and patted the empty space beside her invitingly. Her son watched, one eyebrow slightly raised, waiting to see what I would do. I hesitated, caught between professional boundaries and the impossible-to-refuse request from a man who clearly wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. The momentary silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. "I can sign for you while you work," I offered as a compromise, my hands moving in tandem with my words. "I'll make sure everything is perfect for your dinner." Ms. Ricci looked disappointed but nodded in understanding. Her son's expression remained unchanged, but something in his gaze intensified. "Very conscientious," he remarked. "I respect that." I took their drink orders, sparkling water for Ms. Ricci and an expensive scotch, neat, for Luca. The other men didn't order anything. They weren't there to eat, I realized. They were there for protection. As I turned to leave, Luca's voice stopped me. "How long have you worked here, Emma Foster?" The way he said my full name sent a shiver down my spine, not entirely unpleasant. 6 months, I answered, turning back to face him. "And before that?" I blinked, caught off guard by his interest in my employment history. "The hospital. I was a nursing assistant." Something darkened in his expression. "Why did you leave? Marco would have a fit if he saw me standing here." being interrogated by a customer instead of rushing to get their drinks. But something told me Marco wouldn't say a word as long as Luca Ricci wanted to talk to me. Budget cuts, I said simply, not mentioning how the timing couldn't have been worse, coming just 2 weeks after my mother's diagnosis. Luca studied me for a moment longer, then nodded once as if I'd confirmed something for him. The drinks, please. I escaped to the bar, my heart racing as if I'd just run a mile. What had just happened? Why would someone like Luca Ricci be interested in my work history? When I returned with their drinks, Ms. Ricci was animated, signing rapidly to her son. She stopped when she saw me, her face lighting up again. I set down her sparkling water, complete with a twist of lemon, just as she'd requested. "Thank you," she signed. "You're very kind." "Do you work here every night?" I placed Luca's scotch in front of him, acutely aware of his eyes tracking my every movement. "Most nights," I signed back. "Tuesday through Saturday." She nodded, then asked, "Do you live nearby?" Before I could answer, Luca interrupted, his hands moving swiftly. "Mother, don't interrogate the girl. She's here to work, not share her personal information." But there was something in his expression, a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his jaw, that suggested his concern wasn't for my comfort, but for something else entirely. Ms. Ricci waved her son's comment away. "I'm just being friendly, Luca. Don't be so suspicious of everyone." I pretended not to notice the tension between them as I described the specials again, this time for Luca's benefit. When I finished, Ms. Ricci ordered the Seabass, while Luca chose the ossobuco without even glancing at the menu. As I collected the menus, my hand brushed against his. A jolt of electricity shot up my arm, and I jerked back instinctively, dropping one of the leather-bound menus onto the table. Luca didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly at my reaction. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, quickly retrieving the fallen menu. "Are you always this jumpy, Emma Foster?" he asked, my name again rolling off his tongue like he was savoring it. "Only when being interrogated about my employment history by strangers," I replied before I could stop myself. One of the suited men stiffened, but to my surprise, Luca's mouth curved into the ghost of a smile, there for an instant, then gone. "Fair enough," he said. "We're not strangers now, though, are we?" As I walked away to place their order, I could feel his eyes following me, burning into my back like twin flames. I didn't know what Luca Ricci wanted from me, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. I had somehow caught the attention of the most dangerous man in the city, and I had no idea what that meant for me. I spent the next hour in a strange dance around the Ricci table, bringing appetizers, refilling drinks, and signing with Ms. Ricci whenever I could. She was charming and easy to talk to, asking about my family with genuine interest. I found myself sharing more than I intended, about my mother's illness, my cousin Jason who had taught me to sign, even the tiny apartment I shared with my roommate Liv on the east side of town. Each time I revealed something personal, I felt Luca's gaze intensify. He rarely joined our signed conversations, preferring instead to watch the exchange with those dark, penetrating eyes. When he did interject, it was usually to steer his mother away from asking questions that were too invasive. "You shouldn't have to work so hard," Ms. Ricci signed after I told her about my typical 70-hour work week split between Bellissimo and my weekend job at a local coffee shop. "A pretty girl like you should be enjoying life." I smiled politely as I cleared away her empty plate. "Bills don't pay themselves," I signed back. "And my mother's medication is expensive." Luca's hand suddenly closed around my wrist as I reached for his plate. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm enough that I couldn't pull away without making a scene. The restaurant sounds seemed to fade as blood rushed in my ears. "What kind of cancer?" he asked quietly. I blinked, startled that he'd been following our conversation so closely. "Pancreatic," I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. Stage 3 when they found it. His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against my pulse point, which was now racing beneath his touch. "And the prognosis? They give her a year, maybe 18 months with aggressive treatment." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I'd spoken them so many times to so many doctors that they should have lost their power to hurt me, but they hadn't. Each time felt like the first, raw and devastating. Something flashed in Luca's eyes. Not pity, which I had grown to hate, but something else. Understanding, perhaps. He released my wrist slowly, almost reluctantly. "I lost my father to cancer 3 years ago," he said, his voice so low that only I could hear. "Lung. It was quick. For a brief moment, we weren't employer and waitress, or powerful mafia boss and nobody. We were just two people who understood what it meant to watch someone you love fade away day by day. The shared pain created an unexpected bridge between us, fragile but real." The moment shattered when one of the suited men leaned over and whispered something in Luca's ear. His expression hardened instantly, the vulnerability I'd glimpsed vanishing behind an impassive mask. "Bring the check," he instructed, all business once more. "We'll be leaving shortly." I nodded and retreated to the computer terminal to print their bill. My wrist still tingled where his fingers had been, the phantom pressure a reminder of how easily he had reached out and claimed my attention, my space. When I returned with the leather folder containing their bill, Luca was signing rapidly to his mother, who looked disappointed. He stopped when he noticed me. "Mother isn't feeling well," he explained, though I hadn't asked. "We need to cut our evening short." Ms. Ricci sighed dramatically and signed to me. I wanted dessert. "The tiramisu here is excellent." I couldn't help but smile at her obvious ploy to stay longer. "Perhaps next time," I signed back. "I hope you feel better soon." "You are sweet," she replied, then added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "Luca, why don't you invite Emma to—" Luca cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Mother," he warned aloud. Ms. Ricci rolled her eyes at her son's interruption. "He's always so serious." She signed to me with an exaggerated expression of exasperation, ever since he took over after his father died. Luca placed several crisp $100 bills inside the check folder, without even looking at the total. Far more than the cost of their meal. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a fluid grace that spoke of wealth and power so ingrained they were second nature. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma Foster," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated before placing my much smaller hand in his. His skin was warm and smooth, apart from calluses I wouldn't have expected on a man who wore custom suits and drank 30-year-old scotch. "Thank you for taking such good care of my mother," he added, holding my hand a beat too long before releasing it. "She doesn't often get the chance to converse so freely." "It was my pleasure," I replied honestly. Despite the undercurrent of tension that had surrounded our interactions, I had genuinely enjoyed talking with Ms. Ricci. One of the suited men helped Ms. Ricci to her feet. She smiled warmly at me and signed, "I'll come back to see you soon, Emma. I look forward to it." I signed back. As they prepared to leave, Marco materialized beside me, practically vibrating with nervous energy. He bowed slightly to Luca. "Mr. Ricci, it was an honor to have you dine with us tonight. Please know you're always welcome at Bellissimo." Luca barely acknowledged him with a nod before turning back to me. "Tuesday through Saturday, you said?" My breath caught. He'd remembered my schedule. "Yes." "Good." A single word, delivered with such finality that it sounded like both a promise and a threat. I watched them leave, Luca and his mother flanked by the 3 security men who scanned the restaurant with vigilant eyes as they moved toward the exit. Just before they disappeared through the door, Luca glanced back over his shoulder, his gaze finding mine unerringly across the crowded room. Something passed between us in that brief connection. Something that made my skin flush hot, then cold. Marco interrupted my thoughts with an incredulous whisper. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Luca Ricci," I said, stating the obvious. "Not just Luca Ricci," Marco hissed, grabbing my elbow and pulling me away from the now empty booth. "That was the Luca Ricci, head of the Ricci family since his father died. He owns half this city, including this restaurant. People who cross him don't tend to stay in good health, if you understand what I'm saying." A chill ran down my spine. I'd known who the Riccis were in an abstract way. Everyone did. But having Marco lay it out so bluntly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "And he was watching you like you were his next meal," Marco added, his voice dropping even lower. "What the hell did you do to catch his attention?" "Nothing," I insisted, pulling my arm free from his grasp. "His mother is deaf. I know sign language. That's it. Marco looked skeptical. Well, whatever it is, be careful. Men like Luca Ricci don't notice women like you unless they want something. His words stung, even though I knew they contained a harsh truth. What would someone like Luca Ricci want with someone like me? The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I couldn't stop replaying the evening in my mind. The intensity of Luca's gaze, the gentle pressure of his hand on my wrist, the fleeting moment of connection when we spoke of losing parents to cancer. Each memory sent a confusing mix of apprehension and something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely, coursing through me. By the time I left the restaurant at midnight, my feet were throbbing, and exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. The night air was crisp with early autumn, and I pulled my thin jacket tighter around me as I began the 15-minute walk to the bus stop. The street was quiet, most of the high-end shops and restaurants already closed for the night. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, punctuated by the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional burst of laughter from late-night revelers. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice the sleek black car idling at the curb until I was almost level with it. The passenger window slid down silently, revealing one of the suited men who had been at Luca's table earlier. "Ms. Foster," he said, his voice neutral but authoritative. "Mr. Ricci would like to offer you a ride home." My heart leapt into my throat. I stopped walking, suddenly aware of how deserted the street was. "That's not necessary. I take the bus. The last bus left 10 minutes ago." I checked my watch in alarm. He was right. I'd lost track of time during the closing duties and missed the last direct bus. Now I would have to take a much longer route, with a transfer in a neighborhood I avoided after dark. "I'll manage," I said, taking a step back from the car. The rear passenger door opened, and Luca Ricci emerged, unfolding his tall frame with languid ease. He'd discarded his suit jacket, and the crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves revealed strong forearms dusted with dark hair. The streetlight cast half his face in shadow, giving him an almost predatory appearance. "It's late, Emma," he said, my name once again sounding like something intimate when he spoke it. "The bus you're waiting for isn't coming, and the alternative route passes through Westridge." The fact that he knew my transportation options sent a ripple of unease through me. "How did you—" "You told my mother you live on the east side. There's only one bus line that runs this late from here to there." He took a step toward me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtle with notes of cedar and amber. "Let me drive you home." It wasn't a request, despite the phrasing. "Where is your mother?" I asked, stalling for time while I tried to decide what to do. "I had my driver take her home first." His eyes never left mine. "She was quite taken with you, Mr. Ricci." "Luca," he corrected, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Luca," I amended, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't make a habit of getting into cars with men I barely know." "A wise policy," he agreed, surprising me, "but perhaps you could make an exception tonight. It's going to rain soon." As if on cue, I felt the first drop hit my cheek, followed quickly by another. I looked up at the sky, which had been clear when I'd left the restaurant but was now heavy with clouds. "How did you know it would rain?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. Luca's almost smile widened a fraction. "I checked the weather forecast." I felt foolish for immediately assuming something more sinister. Of course he checked the weather forecast. It was the most normal thing he'd done all evening. The rain began to fall more steadily now, cold drops sliding down the back of my neck. My thin jacket offered little protection, and soon my hair was plastered to my head, water dripping from the end of my nose. "Emma," Luca said, his voice gentler than I'd heard it before, "please let me take you home. I promise you'll arrive safely." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain. The smart thing would be to refuse, to walk to the next bus stop and take my chances with the longer route. But something in his expression, a flicker of what seemed like genuine concern, made me hesitate. "Why?" I asked finally, raindrops catching on my eyelashes. "Why wait for me? Why offer me a ride? You don't know me." Luca stepped closer, so close I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. He lifted his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement as if to give me time to step away. When I remained still, He brushed a wet strand of hair from my face, his fingers leaving trails of heat against my cold skin. "Let's just say I don't like the idea of you walking alone through Westridge at 1 a.m, he said, his voice low and intense. "Not when I have a perfectly good car and driver at my disposal." The rational part of my brain screamed that getting into a car with a man rumored to be the head of the city's most powerful crime family was far more dangerous than any neighborhood. But another part, a part I didn't fully understand, wanted to say yes. A particularly heavy gust of wind drove the rain sideways, soaking through my jacket and shirt until they clung to my skin. I shivered involuntarily. "Fine," I conceded, wrapping my arms around myself in a futile attempt to retain warmth. "Thank you for the ride." The relief that flashed across Luca's face was so brief I might have imagined it. He placed his hand lightly on the small of my back, guiding me toward the open car door. The touch sent warmth spiraling through me despite my wet clothes. The interior of the car was warm and smelled of rich leather. I slid across the seat, acutely conscious of the water dripping from my clothes onto what was undoubtedly extremely expensive upholstery. Luca followed, closing the door behind him. "Andino will need your address," he said, nodding toward the driver, who watched me impassively in the rearview mirror. I hesitated, then gave my address, hyper-aware that I was telling a dangerous man exactly where I lived. Andino nodded once and pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the sparse late-night traffic. "You're cold," Luca observed, reaching for something beside him. He produced a cashmere sweater in dark gray, offering it to me without comment. "I'm fine," I lied, my body betraying me with another visible shiver. Luca's eyebrow arched skeptically. "You're shaking and your lips are turning blue." "Take the sweater, Emma." I accepted it reluctantly, though my fingers itched to feel the soft fabric against my skin. "I'll get it wet." "It will dry," he replied simply. I pulled the sweater over my head, enveloped immediately in warmth and his scent. It was enormous on me, the sleeves hanging well past my fingertips, but the instant comfort it provided was undeniable. "Better?" he asked, watching me with that unnervingly intense gaze. I nodded, sinking deeper into the soft leather seat. The gentle motion of the car combined with the warmth and the late hour began to make my eyelids heavy. I fought against the drowsiness, unwilling to let my guard down completely. "Why were you waiting for me?" I asked again, needing to understand. The truth this time. Luca studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. Rain streamed down the windows, creating shifting patterns of shadow across his features. "You intrigue me," he said finally. "Not many people would have the courage, or the skill, to communicate with a stranger in sign language without hesitation. Fewer still would stand their ground when confronted with someone like me, someone like you," I repeated softly. "Someone who makes you nervous," he clarified, his voice pitched low enough that Andino couldn't hear. "Don't pretend I don't. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself when I'm near. Yet you don't run. You don't cower." "Maybe I'm just good at hiding my fear," I suggested. The corner of his mouth lifted. "No, you're remarkably transparent, Emma Foster. Every thought and emotion crosses your face like words on a page. It's refreshing." The intimacy of his observation made my cheeks warm, despite the chill that still lingered in my bones. I turned to look out the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. "We're almost to your building," Luca noted after a few minutes of silence. I straightened, surprised to see the familiar street corners of my neighborhood. The ride had seemed both infinitely long and impossibly short. Andino pulled up to the curb outside my apartment building, a shabby 6th-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a perpetually broken elevator. I felt a flash of embarrassment at having Luca see where I lived, so different from what must be his world of luxury and privilege. Before I could reach for the door handle, Luca placed his hand gently on my arm. "Emma." I turned to look at him, suddenly aware of how close we were in the confines of the back seat. His eyes were darker than ever in the shadowy interior, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "What?" I whispered. "I'll be seeing you again," he said, the words somewhere between a promise and a warning. "Is that a request or a statement?" I asked, finding an unexpected spark of courage. Something like amusement flickered across Luca's face. Let's call it an inevitability. He reached past me to open my door, his arm brushing against mine. The brief contact sent electricity dancing across my skin. Rain immediately gusted into the car, but Luca didn't seem to notice or care. "Keep the sweater," he said when I began to pull it over my head. "You can return it to me next time." Next time. The words hung between us, laden with implication. "Thank you for the ride," I managed, sliding across the seat toward the open door. "Good night, Emma Foster," Luca replied, my name once again sounding like something precious when he spoke it. I hurried through the rain to my building's entrance, fumbling with cold fingers to unlock the security door. Only when I was safely inside did I turn to look back at the car. It remained at the curb, its engine idling, dark windows revealing nothing of the man inside, watching, waiting. I climbed the 4 flights to my apartment, each step an effort as exhaustion pulled at my limbs. The car was still there when I glanced out the window of the hallway. Only after I'd entered my apartment, locking the door behind me, did I hear the engine rev and fade as the black car pulled away. My roommate Liv was still awake, curled on our threadbare couch with her laptop and a mug of tea. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening at my rain-soaked appearance and the expensive sweater that clearly wasn't mine. "What happened to you?" she asked, setting her laptop aside. "You look like you either had the best night ever or the worst." "I honestly don't know," I replied, sinking into our ancient armchair, too tired to even remove my wet shoes. Liv studied me with growing concern. "Em, you're scaring me. What happened?" I took a deep breath and told her everything, about Ms. Ricci and her son, the signed conversations, the missed bus, and the ride home. Liv's expression grew increasingly alarmed as I spoke. "Luca Ricci gave you a ride home?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "The Luca Ricci? As in, the man who supposedly had 3 people disappeared last year for skimming from his waterfront casinos? Those are just rumors," I said weakly, though I didn't entirely believe it myself. "My cousin works for the DA's office," Liv countered. "Trust me, they're not just rumors. They just can't prove anything because no one will testify against him." She leaned forward, gripping my hands tightly. "Em, you need to stay away from him. Men like that are dangerous. They see something they want. They take it." A shiver that had nothing to do with my damp clothes ran through me. "You think he wants me? Why else would he wait outside your workplace and drive you home? Why else would he tell you he'll be seeing you again?" Liv's eyes dropped to the sweater I was wearing. "And why else would he give you his clothes to wear? It's like he's marking his territory." "That's ridiculous," I protested. But her words had struck an uncomfortable chord. There had been something possessive in the way Luca looked at me, something that went beyond normal interest. "Promise me you'll be careful," Liv insisted. "If he comes back to the restaurant, tell Marco you can't serve his table." I laughed humorlessly. Marco practically worships the ground Luca walks on. There's no way he'd let me refuse to serve him. I ran a hand through my damp hair, wincing as my fingers caught in tangled strands. Besides, it was probably a one-time thing. He was just being kind because I helped his mother. Liv looked unconvinced, but she dropped the subject, instead urging me to take a hot shower before I caught pneumonia. I gratefully followed her advice, standing under the steaming water until some of the chill finally left my bones. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself running my fingers over the soft cashmere of Luca's sweater, which I'd folded neatly on my nightstand. Despite my exhaustion, sleep remained elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Luca's intense gaze, felt the phantom touch of his hand on my wrist, heard his voice saying my name as if it belonged to him. "Next time," he'd said, as if it were already decided. The most unsettling part wasn't that I was afraid of seeing him again. It was that some small, reckless part of me was looking forward to it. 3 days passed without any sign of Luca Ricci. I worked my shifts at Bellissimo, served wealthy patrons who barely acknowledged my existence, and tried to convince myself that the strange encounter had been nothing more than an aberration. Perhaps Luca had already forgotten about me, moved on to some other curiosity that caught his attention. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it left me with an inexplicable hollow feeling that I refused to examine too closely. On Tuesday evening, I arrived at Bellissimo for my shift to find Marco waiting for me, his expression a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "There you are," he said, checking his watch pointedly, though I was 5 minutes early. "I need to talk to you." He pulled me into the small office behind the host stand, closing the door for privacy. "Mr. Ricci called the restaurant this morning," he said without preamble. My heart stuttered. "Luca Ricci?" Marco nodded, his eyes darting anxiously to the door as if afraid of being overheard. "He asked specifically about your schedule this week. Wanted to know which evenings you'd be working." "And you told him?" I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. Marco looked affronted. "Of course I told him. This is Luca Ricci we're talking about. When he asks questions, you answer them." He straightened his tie nervously. "Anyway, he made a reservation for tonight. Table 12 again. He specifically requested you as his server." A confusing mix of apprehension and anticipation swirled in my stomach. "Just him?" "He didn't say," Marco replied, "but he reserved the table for two. My mind immediately went to Ms. Ricci, but something told me it wouldn't be her joining Luca tonight. "What time?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. 8 o'clock. Marco studied me with sudden suspicion. "What's going on between you and Ricci? And don't tell me it's just because you can sign with his mother. He didn't request a table for his mother tonight." "Nothing's going on," I insisted, though the flush creeping up my neck likely told a different story. "I barely know him." Marco looked skeptical, but was distracted by the arrival of early dinner patrons. "Just be professional," he warned, as he headed back to the host stand. "And for God's sake, don't do anything to upset him. The last thing we need is Luca Ricci's displeasure." The hours until 8 o'clock crawled by with excruciating slowness. I moved through my duties mechanically, taking orders and delivering food while my mind churned with possibilities. Who would be joining Luca tonight? A business associate? A girlfriend? The thought sent an unexpected pang through me, which I immediately tried to suppress. At 7:30, I retreated to the employee restroom to check my appearance. My reflection stared back at me from the streaky mirror. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes from too many late nights worrying about hospital bills, hair pulled back in a serviceable but uninspiring bun. I pinched my cheeks to bring some color to them, then immediately felt foolish. What did it matter how I looked? This was just another customer, another table to serve. But the flutter in my stomach told a different story. I returned to the dining room just as Luca arrived, precisely at 8 o'clock. He wore a deep blue suit that made his olive skin glow in the warm restaurant lighting, the crisp white shirt beneath it open at the collar. Every head turned as he moved through the restaurant, an automatic response to the aura of power that surrounded him like a tangible force. Marco was already fawning over him, leading him to the corner booth with exaggerated deference. Luca scanned the room as he walked, his eyes finding mine unerringly despite the crowded dining area. Something in his gaze made my breath catch. A heat, an intensity that hadn't been there before. I forced myself to finish refilling water glasses at my current table before approaching Luca's booth. "Professional," Marco had said. I could be professional. By the time I reached table 12, Luca was seated alone, a sleek leather briefcase beside him. No second guest had arrived. "Good evening, Mr. Ricci," I said, proud that my voice remained steady. "Welcome back to Bellissimo, Emma," he replied, my name warm on his tongue. "I thought we'd established that you would call me Luca." I felt my cheeks warm. "Luca," I amended. "Will someone be joining you this evening?" His eyes never left mine. "Yes, you." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" "Sit down, Emma," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. It wasn't a request. I glanced around the restaurant, acutely aware of the other patrons, of Marco watching from across the room. "I'm working," I reminded him. "Not anymore, not tonight." Luca raised his hand slightly, and Marco immediately hurried over. "Is everything all right, Mr. Ricci?" he asked, studiously avoiding my gaze. "Everything's fine," Luca replied smoothly. "I've arranged with your manager to have Emma's shift covered tonight. She'll be dining with me instead." Marco nodded as if this were perfectly normal. "Of course. I'll have Tomas take over Emma's tables immediately." "Wait," I interjected, finding my voice. Don't I get a say in this? Both men looked at me with varying degrees of surprise. Marco appeared horrified that I would question the arrangement, while Luca seemed more intrigued than offended. You need the income from tonight's shift, Luca stated. Not a question, but a fact. I'll compensate you for it. Triple what you would have made, including tips. Triple. The figure echoed in my head. That would cover at least 2 of my mother's prescription refills. Why? I asked, ignoring Marco's increasingly panicked expression. Why do you want to have dinner with me? Luca's gaze was unwavering. Because I find you interesting. Because I want to talk with you without interruption. Because I enjoy your company. He paused, then added more softly. Because you're the first person in a long time who's looked at me and seen me, not just my name or my reputation. His honesty caught me off guard. I stood frozen, torn between self-preservation and curiosity, between common sense and the inexplicable pull I felt toward this dangerous man. Please, he added, the word sounding foreign from his lips, as if he rarely had occasion to use it. Have dinner with me, Emma. It was the please that undid me. One simple word that transformed his command into a genuine request, that hinted at a vulnerability beneath the power and control. All right, I conceded, sliding into the booth across from him. One dinner. The satisfaction that flashed across his face was almost predatory. Marco, visibly relieved, scurried away to inform Tomas of the change in assignments. Your sweater is at my apartment, I said once we were alone, filling the sudden silence. I forgot to bring it tonight. I wasn't expecting to see you. Keep it, Luca replied dismissively. It looks better on you anyway. The casual compliment sent warmth spreading through me. You didn't have to go through all this trouble just to have dinner with me. You could have asked. Would you have said yes? The question gave me pause. Would I have? After Liv's warnings, after my own misgivings about who and what Luca Ricci was? I don't know, I answered honestly. He nodded, accepting my uncertainty without offense. Then I saved us both the awkwardness of that situation. A waiter, not Thomas but Antonio, the senior server who handled only the most important guests, appeared at our table with an ice bucket containing an already opened bottle of champagne. Without asking, he poured 2 flutes, set a basket of fresh bread between us, and discreetly withdrew. I didn't order this, I noted, eyeing the champagne with suspicion. I did. Earlier today. Luca lifted his glass, waiting for me to do the same, to unexpected connections. I hesitated, then raised my own glass to meet his. To honesty, I countered, holding his gaze steadily. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. He touched his glass to mine with a delicate chime. To honesty. The champagne was unlike any I'd tasted before, crisp and complex with notes of apple and honey. I took a small sip, aware that I needed to keep my wits about me. Tell me about your mother, Luca said after a moment, surprising me with the directness of his question. What do you want to know? I asked cautiously. Everything. He leaned forward slightly. Her name. What she was like before she got sick, what treatments she's receiving, which hospital. I narrowed my eyes. Why? Because it matters to you, he replied simply, and because I may be able to help. I don't need charity, I said automatically, a reflexive defense born from months of pitying looks and well-meaning but unhelpful suggestions. Luca's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I'm not offering charity, Emma. I'm offering resources. There's a difference. I took another sip of champagne, considering his words. Her name is Catherine, I said finally. She was a high school English teacher before she got sick. Loved her job. Loved her students. She's always been the strongest person I know. Raised me alone after my father left when I was 3. Worked 2 jobs to put herself through college while taking care of me. The words came more easily than I'd expected, flowing out of me like water from a broken dam. I told him about the day we'd received the diagnosis, how the doctor's words had seemed to echo in the sterile examination room, how my mother had simply nodded as if she'd been expecting it all along, how I'd been the one to break down in the car afterward while she comforted me. Luca listened with an intensity that was becoming familiar, his eyes never leaving my face. His attention complete and unwavering. He asked occasional questions about the specific treatment protocol, about the oncologist overseeing her care, about the hospital where she received her weekly chemotherapy. His questions were surprisingly knowledgeable, suggesting a deeper understanding of cancer treatment than most people possessed. "Memorial West," I said when he asked which hospital. "It's not the best, but it's what her insurance covers." Something flashed in Luca's eyes. Determination, perhaps, or resolve. "Memorial West is adequate," he said. "But the oncology department at St. Vincent's is among the top 10 in the country. They're doing a clinical trial for an experimental treatment that's showing promising results for pancreatic cancer." I stared at him, caught off guard by his specific knowledge. "How do you know that?" A shadow passed over his face. "After my father was diagnosed, I researched every treatment option available. I wanted him to have access to the best care possible, regardless of cost." His jaw tightened. "In the end, it didn't matter. The cancer had already spread too far by the time they found it." The raw pain in his voice touched something in me. Without thinking, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "I'm sorry." He looked down at our hands, something unreadable flickering across his features. Slowly, he turned his palm up, his fingers curling around mine. His hand was warm and strong, the touch unexpectedly gentle for a man rumored to be so dangerous. "I can make a call," he said, his voice low and intense. "Get your mother into the clinical trial at St. Vincent's. Their success rates are encouraging, particularly for cases like hers." I withdrew my hand, a chill replacing the warmth of his touch. "Why would you do that? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." "Maybe I want to help because I can," he replied. "Because I have the means and the connections to potentially save your mother's life, and choosing not to use them would be unconscionable." I wanted to believe his motivation was that simple, that pure. But in my experience, nothing came without strings attached, especially not from men in positions of power. "And what would you want in return?" I asked, voicing the question that hung between us. Luca's expression darkened. "Is that what you think of me? That I would use your mother's illness as leverage to get something from you?" The edge in his voice made me wince, but I held my ground. "I don't know what to think of you," I answered honestly. "I know your name. I know what people say about you. I know you're powerful enough to rearrange my work schedule without my consent and get me into the booth of a fully booked restaurant on a moment's notice. What I don't know is why you're interested in me or what you expect from whatever this is." For a long moment, Luca was silent, his dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. A short, genuine sound that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, almost approachable. "You really aren't afraid to speak your mind, are you?" he asked, a note of wonder in his voice. "Not when it comes to my mother," I replied. "Or my integrity." Luca nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I respect that, more than you know." He leaned forward, his gaze holding mine. "I want nothing from you in return, Emma. Nothing you aren't willing to freely give. My offer comes with no strings attached. If you decide after tonight that you never want to see me again, the offer still stands. Your mother's care will not be contingent on your relationship with me." The sincerity in his voice was compelling, but years of struggling had taught me to be wary of solutions that seemed too good to be true. "Why do you care so much?" I asked softly. "About me? About my mother? You barely know us." Luca was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When my father was dying," he said finally, "he made me promise to remember that power without purpose is meaningless, that wealth without compassion is worthless." His eyes met mine, dark and intent. "I have both power and wealth, Emma, but opportunities to use them for something that matters, truly matters, are rare." His words resonated with an unexpected truth. For all his intimidating presence and rumored criminal connections, there was something fundamentally honest about him in this moment, a glimpse of the man beneath the reputation. "I'll think about it," I said, unable to fully commit, but equally unable to dismiss his offer outright. "I need to talk to my mother. It's her decision, not mine." He nodded, accepting my answer without pressing further. Of course, Antonio returned to take our dinner orders. Luca chose for both of us after confirming I had no dietary restrictions, selecting dishes that weren't even on the regular menu. It should have bothered me, this casual assumption of control, but somehow it didn't. There was something almost protective in the way he took charge, removing small decisions from my already overburdened shoulders. As we waited for our food, Luca asked about my life, my childhood, my education, my dreams before they'd been interrupted by my mother's illness. I found myself telling him things I rarely shared with anyone, about the scholarship I'd had to turn down when my mother got sick, about my half-finished nursing degree, about the poetry I still wrote late at night when I couldn't sleep. "You should finish your degree," he said when I mentioned my interrupted education. "The world has enough waitresses, but good nurses are invaluable." "That's the plan," I replied, "once Mom is better and the medical bills are paid off. And if she doesn't get better?" The question was gentle but direct, forcing me to confront a possibility I tried desperately not to think about. I swallowed hard. "Then I'll still finish. Eventually." It would be what she wanted. Luca reached across the table again, his fingers brushing mine in a touch that seemed both deliberate and casual. "You're stronger than you realize, Emma Foster." The compliment warmed me more than it should have. "Strong enough to have dinner with the most feared man in the city," I quipped, trying to lighten the suddenly heavy atmosphere. His mouth curved into that almost smile. "Is that how you see me? As someone to be feared? Isn't that how you want to be seen?" I countered. "By most people, yes," he admitted readily. "Fear is an effective deterrent against those who might otherwise consider crossing me, but not by you." His voice softened. "Never by you." The intensity of his gaze made me look away, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was something dangerous in his words. Not a threat, but a vulnerability that felt more intimate than any touch. Our food arrived, saving me from having to respond. The dishes were exquisite: tender lamb with rosemary and garlic, handmade pasta with truffles and cream, vegetables so perfectly seasoned they almost outshone the main courses. I recognized immediately that none of these items appeared on Bellissimo's regular menu. They had been prepared specially for Luca. "This is amazing," I said after the first bite, genuinely impressed. "I've worked here 6 months and never tasted anything like it. Chef Marconi worked for my family before opening this restaurant," Luca explained, watching me with evident pleasure as I savored the food. "He still remembers my favorites." "Your family-owned restaurants?" I asked, surprised by this glimpse into his background. Luca nodded, cutting his lamb with precise movements. "Among other businesses, my grandfather came to this country with nothing but his skills as a chef. He worked in kitchens for 15 years, saving every penny until he could open his own place in Little Italy." His expression softened with something like nostalgia. "It was tiny, just 6 tables, but it was always full. People would wait for hours for his carbonara." I tried to imagine Luca's grandfather, a young immigrant with dreams of building something lasting in a new country. It was hard to reconcile that image with the empire his family now commanded. "From restaurant owner to whatever it is your family does now," I said carefully. "That's quite a transition." A hint of amusement flickered in Luca's eyes. "My grandfather understood that survival requires adaptation. The restaurant was just the beginning. It gave him connections, respect in the community, a foothold." He took a sip of wine. "The rest evolved naturally." The deliberate vagueness wasn't lost on me. Neither was the implication that his family's rise to power hadn't been entirely legitimate. "And now?" I asked. "What does the Ricci family business entail these days?" "Real estate, primarily," he replied smoothly. "Construction, import-export, hospitality, all perfectly legal and above board." The last part was delivered with a slight quirk of his lips that suggested he knew I wouldn't entirely believe him. "And the other things?" I pressed, surprising myself with my boldness. "The things people whisper about?" Luca set down his fork, his expression growing serious. "Do you really want to know, Emma? Because once I tell you, there's no going back. Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss." A shiver ran through me at the gravity in his voice. He was offering me a choice: to remain in the safe territory of plausible deniability, or to step across a line into knowledge that might change everything. "I want the truth," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever that is." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing my readiness for whatever he was about to share. Then he nodded once, decisively. "My family protects people," he said simply. "We provide security and resolution when traditional channels fail. Yes, sometimes that involves methods that exist in gray areas of the law. But we have a code. We don't harm innocents. We don't deal in drugs. And we don't exploit women or children." "You make it sound almost noble," I observed, not entirely sure if I believed him. "There's nothing noble about violence," he countered, surprising me with his candor. "But there is honor in protecting those who cannot protect themselves, in ensuring justice when the system fails." His eyes held mine, dark and intent. "The world isn't black and white, Emma. Most of us live in the gray." There was truth in his words, a truth I'd encountered during my brief time working in the hospital. I'd seen abuse victims return to their abusers because restraining orders failed to keep them safe. I'd watched elderly patients get swindled out of life savings with no recourse. I'd witnessed the system fail those it was meant to protect, time and again. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked softly. "Because you asked," he replied simply. "And because if we are to—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "If we are to know each other, I want it to be with clear eyes. No illusions. Know each other." The phrase hung between us, laden with possibility. "I'm just a waitress with a half-finished nursing degree, and more responsibility than I know how to handle," I said, needing to be equally honest. "I'm not sure what someone like you sees in someone like me." Luca reached across the table, his fingers tracing a gentle pattern on the back of my hand. "I see someone who carries the weight of the world without complaint, who works 2 jobs and still finds energy to sign with a stranger's deaf mother, who looks me in the eye and demands truth when most would settle for comfortable lies." His voice dropped lower, more intense. "I see a woman whose strength and compassion match her beauty, and I find myself captivated." Heat bloomed in my cheeks, spreading down my neck to my chest. No one had ever spoken to me like that before, with such focused intensity, such unguarded admiration. "I'm not sure what to say to that," I admitted. His mouth curved into that ghost of a smile. "You don't need to say anything." The rest of dinner passed in a haze of rich food, easy conversation, and lingering glances that made my skin tingle with awareness. Luca asked about my poetry, seeming genuinely interested when I reluctantly shared that I wrote mostly about resilience and finding beauty in struggle. He told me more about his mother, how she'd lost her hearing gradually after an illness in her 30s, how she'd refused to let it diminish her in any way, insisting on learning sign language and teaching the entire family. "She liked you," he said, as we shared a tiramisu that was unlike any dessert I'd ever tasted. "She doesn't warm to many people." "I liked her too," I replied honestly. "Will she come back to the restaurant? Would you like her to?" I nodded. "She reminds me of my mom, that same stubborn strength." Something softened in Luca's expression. "I'll bring her next week. She'd enjoy that." By the time we finished, the restaurant had emptied of other patrons, though the staff remained, pretending to be busy while clearly waiting for Luca to leave. I glanced at my watch, startled to find it was nearly midnight. "I should get home," I said reluctantly. "I have an early shift at the coffee shop tomorrow." Luca nodded, signaling to Antonio for the check, which he paid without even glancing at the total. As we stood to leave, he placed his hand lightly on the small of my back, guiding me toward the exit. The touch was gentle but possessive, drawing curious glances from the remaining staff. Outside, the same sleek black car from the other night waited at the curb, Andino standing beside the passenger door. The night air was cool, autumn asserting itself more firmly now, and I shivered slightly in my thin server's uniform. "May I drive you home?" Luca asked, his tone making it clear that he would accept my refusal if I gave it. This time I didn't hesitate. "Yes. Thank you." The ride to my apartment was both similar to and entirely different from the previous one. Similar in the comfort of the luxury vehicle, the quiet competence of Andino's driving. Different in the charged atmosphere between Luca and me, the awareness that had built throughout our dinner conversation. When we arrived at my building, Luca surprised me by exiting the car with me. "I'll walk you to your door," he said, his tone brooking no argument. I should have protested. This was how he would learn exactly where I lived, which apartment was mine. But the truth was, I wanted those few extra minutes with him, those few additional steps in his company. 4th floor, I warned as we entered the shabby lobby. The elevator's been broken for months. I don't mind stairs, Luca replied simply. He followed me up the narrow stairwell, his presence filling the confined space. I was acutely aware of him behind me. His steady breathing, the subtle scent of his cologne, the careful placement of his feet on the worn steps. At my door, I turned to face him, suddenly nervous. "Thank you for dinner," I said, the words woefully inadequate for the evening we'd shared. "And for the conversation. Thank you for your company," he replied softly, "and your honesty." We stood there for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken possibilities. Luca was close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, could count his dark eyelashes if I tried. My heart hammered in my chest, loud enough that I was certain he must hear it. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "May I see you again, Emma?" he asked, his voice lower than before. I knew what the sensible answer would be. This man was dangerous, not just because of who he was and what he did, but because of how he made me feel, like I was worth noticing, worth knowing, worth pursuing. "Yes," I whispered, the word escaping before I could reconsider. The smile that transformed his face was unlike any expression I'd seen from him before. Open, genuine, almost boyish in its pleasure. It made him look younger, more approachable, and infinitely more dangerous to my peace of mind. "Tomorrow night?" he suggested. "I'll pick you up at 7. I have to work until 9, I reminded him. "Then I'll pick you up at 9:15, he amended smoothly. "Wear something comfortable, nothing fancy." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" "No." The glint in his eye was almost playful. "Let me surprise you." Before I could respond, he leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. When I remained still, he pressed his lips to my cheek, the contact brief but electrifying. "Good night, Emma Foster," he murmured against my skin, his breath warm and intoxicating. Then he was gone, descending the stairs with quiet confidence, leaving me standing outside my apartment with my cheek tingling and my heart racing like I'd run a marathon. Inside, Liv was waiting up for me again, her expression shifting from concern to alarm when she saw my face. "Oh no," she said, sitting up straight on the couch. "I know that look." "What happened?" I sank into the armchair, emotionally and physically exhausted, but strangely exhilarated. "I had dinner with Luca Ricci." "You what?" Liv's voice rose to a near shriek. "After everything I told you about him, he arranged it with Marco," I explained weakly. "He had my shift covered and everything." "Of course he did," Liv muttered, running a hand through her already disheveled hair. "Men like him are used to getting what they want." She fixed me with a stern look. "Please tell me you turned him down." I couldn't meet her eyes. "He offered to help my mom get into a clinical trial at St. Vincent's. One that's showing promising results for pancreatic cancer." Liv's expression softened slightly at the mention of my mother, but her concern remained evident. "And what does he want in return?" "Nothing," I said. "That's what he claims anyway." "Men like Luca Ricci don't do something for nothing," Liv insisted. "There's always a price." I thought about the way Luca had looked at me across the dinner table, the intensity in his dark eyes when he'd called me captivating. "Maybe the price isn't what you think." Liv studied my face, her expression growing more alarmed by the second. "Oh God, you like him. You actually like him." "I don't know him well enough to like him," I protested, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. "You know enough to be afraid of him," Liv countered. "He's a criminal, Em. Maybe not convicted, but everyone knows what the Ricci family does." She leaned forward, gripping my hands tightly. "Whatever he's offering, the clinical trial, the fancy dinner, the rides home, it's not worth getting mixed up in his world." Part of me knew she was right, the sensible, cautious part that had kept me going through all the hardships of the past year. But another part, a part that was growing stronger with each encounter, was drawn to Luca in a way I couldn't explain or deny. "I'm seeing him again tomorrow night," I admitted quietly. Liv closed her eyes, her expression pained. "Oh, Em." "Just one more time," I said, though I didn't entirely believe it myself. "To discuss the details about the clinical trial for Mom." "Right," Liv replied. her tone making it clear she didn't believe me either. "Just be careful, okay? Don't forget who he is, what he is." "I won't," I promised, but as I lay in bed that night, replaying every moment of the evening, the way Luca had listened so intently, the gentle touch of his hand on mine, the press of his lips against my cheek, I wondered if I was already in too deep to heed Leave's warning. The next evening at work, I was distracted, dropping a tray of drinks and mixing up orders in a way that was completely unlike me. Marco noticed, pulling me aside after I delivered breadsticks to a table that had ordered garlic knots. "What's wrong with you tonight?" he demanded. "You're a mess." "Sorry," I mumbled, rubbing my temples where a tension headache was forming. "I didn't sleep well." Marco's expression softened slightly. "Look, I know this situation with Ricci is unusual, but try to focus, okay? At least until your shift ends." I nodded, forcing myself to concentrate for the remaining 2 hours. When 9 o'clock finally arrived, I changed out of my server's uniform in the employee restroom, swapping it for the simple jeans and sweater I'd brought with me. Luca had said comfortable, nothing fancy. Still, I found myself wishing I had nicer clothes, something that didn't scream perpetually broke waitress. At precisely 9:15, I stepped outside to find the black car waiting at the curb. This time, Luca himself got out to greet me, dressed more casually than I'd seen him before in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that looked sinfully soft. The less formal attire did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. If anything, it enhanced it, making him seem more accessible but no less powerful. "Right on time," I commented as he opened the passenger door for me. "I value punctuality," he replied with that ghost of a smile. "And I was looking forward to seeing you." The simple admission warmed me from the inside out. I slid into the car, breathing in the now familiar scent of leather and Luca's subtle cologne. He joined me in the back seat, signaling to Andino with a nod. "You still haven't told me where we're going," I pointed out as the car pulled away from the curb. "Patience," Luca replied, amusement lacing his voice. "We'll be there in about 20 minutes. He asked about my day, seeming genuinely interested in the mundane details of my coffee shop morning shift and the dinner service at Bellissimo. I found myself relaxing, the tension of the workday melting away as I described a particularly difficult customer who had sent back his steak 3 times. "I hope you charged him for all 3 steaks," Luca remarked, his tone suggesting it wasn't entirely a joke. I laughed. "I don't think Marco would dare." "He would if I suggested it," Luca said, the casual reminder of his influence making me momentarily uneasy. He must have noticed my change in expression, because he reached over to take my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I'm sorry. That sounded more threatening than I intended." The apology surprised me. "It's okay," I said, not pulling my hand away. "It's just strange for me, being with someone who has so much power, who's used to getting his way." Luca's thumb traced a pattern on my palm, sending tingles up my arm. "I don't want you to be uncomfortable with me, Emma. Ever." He paused, his expression serious. "If I overstep, tell me. I might not always realize when I'm being too much." The vulnerability in his admission touched me. This man, who commanded fear and respect from everyone around him, was asking me to check him, to tell him when he went too far. It was both endearing and slightly terrifying. "I will," I promised. We drove through the city center and then east, away from the waterfront district where the Ricci family held the most influence. I watched with growing curiosity as we entered a quieter residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets and older homes set back from the road. The car finally stopped in front of a modest 2-story house, with warm yellow light spilling from the windows. It was nothing like what I would have expected Luca to own. No mansion, no obvious security, just a well-maintained home that could belong to any middle-class family. "What is this place?" I asked as Andino opened the door for us. "You'll see," Luca replied, placing his hand on the small of my back as he guided me up the walkway. Instead of using a key, he knocked on the front door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a simple bun. Ms. Ricci's face lit up when she saw us. "You came!" She signed enthusiastically, her gaze moving from her son to me with evident delight. "And you brought Emma." "Hello, Ms. Ricci," I signed back, genuinely pleased to see her again. It's good to see you. Please call me Sophia, she insisted, ushering us inside. Come in. Everything is almost ready. The interior of the house was warm and inviting, with comfortable furniture, framed family photographs, and the tantalizing smell of Italian cooking wafting from the kitchen. It was nothing like the cold, sterile luxury I had imagined surrounded Luca in his daily life. Sophia led us through a living room filled with books and cozy throws to a dining room where a table was already set for 3. A middle-aged woman in a simple uniform was putting the finishing touches on what appeared to be a feast. My mother insisted on cooking for you herself, Luca explained quietly, his hand still resting at the small of my back. She doesn't get many opportunities to share her cooking with new people. I turned to him, surprised. This is your mother's house? He nodded. She prefers to live separately. Says having her own space keeps her independent. Sophia reappeared from the kitchen, carrying a steaming dish of what looked like homemade lasagna. She set it on the table with a flourish, then signed rapidly to me. Luca tells me you're taking care of your own mother, she said, her expression sympathetic. That you had to leave school to help her. I shot Luca a surprised glance. He must have told his mother about our conversation. Yes, I signed back. She has cancer. Sophia's face softened. That's very difficult. You're a good daughter. She gestured to the table. Please, sit. Food helps everything. I couldn't help but smile at her motherly certainty. As we took our seats, I noticed the way Luca watched his mother with quiet affection, a softness in his expression I hadn't seen before. Here, in this warm, normal-looking home, he seemed different. Still powerful, still commanding, but somehow more human. The meal was incredible. Homemade lasagna with layers of delicate pasta and rich meat sauce, crusty bread still warm from the oven, a vibrant salad dressed with olive oil and balsamic vinegar. Sophia insisted on serving me herself, piling my plate high with food while signing that I was too thin, needed to eat more. Throughout the meal, she asked me questions about myself, my childhood, my interests, my dreams for the future. There was something natural and maternal in her curiosity, so different from what I might have expected from the mother of a man like Luca Ricci. She seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not just as someone her son had brought home. You will finish your nursing degree, she signed at one point, her expression brooking no argument. It's important to complete what you start. Mother, Luca chided gently, both speaking and signing. Emma has responsibilities that make that difficult right now. Nonsense, Sophia replied dismissively. Where there's a will, there's a way. We can help. That casual we, the easy inclusion of me in their family circle, left me momentarily speechless. I glanced at Luca, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Help how? I finally signed to Sophia. She waved her hand as if the details were inconsequential. Scholarships, schedule arrangements, whatever you need. Luca handles these things. I felt a flicker of unease. Was this what Liv had warned about? The gradual enmeshment in Luca's world? The slow accumulation of debts I could never repay? Emma can make her own decisions about her education, Luca said, surprising me with his restraint. We're here to offer support, not to dictate her choices. Sophia rolled her eyes at her son but didn't argue. Instead, she began telling me stories about Luca as a child, how serious he had been, how protective of his younger sister Bianca, how he had taught himself sign language at 8 years old when Sophia first began losing her hearing. He would practice for hours, she signed, her expression fond. Such a stubborn boy. Wouldn't stop until he got each sign perfect. I watched Luca's face as his mother spoke of him. There was embarrassment there, but also clear affection. This was a side of him I never would have imagined. The devoted son who learned an entire language for his mother, the serious child who grew into a man carrying the weight of his family's legacy. After dinner, Sophia insisted I help her in the kitchen while Luca took a business call. As we cleared dishes together, she studied me with keen eyes. You're good for him, she signed unexpectedly. He smiles more with you. I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. We barely know each other, I signed back, my movements clumsy with surprise. Sophia shook her head. Sometimes you know quickly. I knew with Luca's father the first night we met. Her expression grew more serious. My son has a difficult life, much responsibility. Not many people see past that to the man underneath. I thought about Luca's words in the restaurant, about how I looked at him and saw him, not just his reputation. He's not what I expected, I admitted. Sophia smiled knowingly. Good. Expectations are boring. Reality is much more interesting. She touched my arm gently. Just promise me you will not judge him only for what others say. See for yourself. Make your own decision. It was sound advice, and surprisingly free of the manipulation I might have expected from someone trying to push her son's interests. Before I could respond, Luca appeared in the doorway, his phone call finished. Are you interrogating Emma? He signed to his mother, his expression amused. Just getting to know her, Sophia replied innocently. Go, take her to the garden. It's a beautiful night. Luca offered me his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it, allowing him to lead me through French doors into a small but meticulously maintained garden. Strings of fairy lights illuminated a stone path that wound through carefully pruned shrubs and late-blooming flowers. A stone bench sat beneath a trellis covered in climbing roses, their scent sweet in the cool night air. Your mother is amazing, I said as we sat on the bench, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. This isn't at all what I expected. What did you expect? Luca asked, genuinely curious. I shrugged, embarrassed. I don't know. Something more intimidating. Bodyguards. A mansion with security gates. Luca smiled slightly. I have that too, he admitted. But my mother prefers this. Normalcy. She has security. Discreet but present, but this neighborhood, this house, it's important to her. It keeps her connected to a simpler life. And you? I asked. Where do you live? Waterfront district, he replied. Top floor of the Riviera building. The Riviera was the most exclusive residential tower in the city, its penthouse apartments rumored to cost more than most people earned in a decade. Of course, that's where he lived. Do you ever want something simpler? The question slipped out before I could consider it. Luca was quiet for a moment, his gaze focused on the darkened garden. Sometimes, he said finally. But simplicity isn't a luxury I can afford. Not with my responsibilities. The weight in his voice touched something in me. For all his power and wealth, Luca Ricci lived within constraints of his own. Different from mine, but no less real. Your mother mentioned your sister, I said, changing the subject. Bianca? A shadow crossed his face. She lives in Europe now. Milan. It's safer for her there. The implication was clear. Safer from the enemies his family had made. Safer from the dangers inherent in the Ricci name. You miss her, I observed softly. Luca's hand found mine in the dim light, his fingers intertwining with my own. Yes, he admitted. Very much. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the night air cool around us, the warmth of his hand anchoring me to the moment. It felt surreal to be here, in this peaceful garden, holding hands with a man whose name inspired fear throughout the city. I spoke to Dr. Rossi at St. Vincent's this morning, Luca said eventually, his voice careful and measured. About the clinical trial. My heart leapt into my throat. And? There's a spot available. Dr. Rossi is one of the leading oncologists in the country, specializing in pancreatic cancer. Luca turned to face me, his expression earnest. He's willing to review your mother's case immediately. If she's a suitable candidate, and based on what you've told me, I believe she will be, treatment could begin as early as next week. I stared at him, scarcely able to believe what I was hearing. How did you arrange this so quickly? The Ricci family has donated substantially to St. Vincent's oncology department over the years, he explained. After my father's diagnosis, I established a foundation in his name to fund research. Dr. Rossi owes me nothing, but he respects what we've done for the hospital. And the cost? I asked. The practical question impossible to ignore. These trials can be expensive, even with insurance. The trial itself is covered by research grants, Luca replied. Any additional expenses will be handled by my father's foundation. Your mother won't see a bill. It was too much to process, this gift that could potentially save my mother's life. offered so matter-of-factly. Hope, that dangerous emotion I'd been suppressing for months, surged within me. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Luca squeezed my hand gently. "Say you'll bring your mother to meet Dr. Rossi on Friday. Say you'll give this a chance." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since his first offer. "The truth, Luca." His dark eyes were solemn in the dim light. "Because I couldn't save my father. But maybe I can help save your mother, because you deserve something good after everything you've sacrificed." His voice dropped lower, more intense. "And yes, because I'm drawn to you in a way I can't fully explain. And I want to see you smile without the shadow of worry that's been in your eyes since the moment we met." The honesty of his answer undid me. A tear slipped down my cheek, followed by another. Without hesitation, Luca reached up to brush them away, his touch impossibly gentle for hands rumored to have ordered violence. "I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Not of you, but of what this means, of owing you something I can never repay." "You owe me nothing," he insisted. "This is freely given, Emma. No strings, no expectations." "There are always strings," I argued softly. "Maybe not ones you're consciously attaching, but they exist. That's how the world works." Luca considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Then let me be clear about what I want," he said finally. "I want to see you again, not out of obligation, but because you choose to. I want the chance to know you better, to see if this connection between us is as real and significant as I believe it to be." His thumb traced the curve of my cheek. "But even if you walk away right now, the offer for your mother stands. That is non-negotiable." I searched his face, looking for any sign of manipulation or deception. Instead, I found only sincerity and something else. A vulnerability that seemed at odds with everything I'd heard about Luca Ricci. "I want to see you again too," I confessed, the truth spilling from me before I could reconsider. "Even though it probably makes me crazy." The smile that transformed his face was breathtaking, open and genuine, and startlingly young. Without warning, he leaned forward, his intention clear. I had every opportunity to pull away, to stop what was about to happen. I didn't. His lips met mine with gentle pressure, the kiss tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When I responded, leaning into him, his hand came up to cradle my face, deepening the kiss with a thoroughness that left me breathless. He tasted of wine and possibility, dangerous and sweet all at once. When we finally pulled apart, I could feel my heart racing, my skin flushed despite the cool night air. Luca's eyes were darker than ever, intense and focused entirely on me. "I've wanted to do that since the first night in the restaurant," he admitted, his voice rough. "When you started signing with my mother and didn't even flinch when I appeared." I laughed softly, the sound slightly shaky. I definitely flinched. I was terrified. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending shivers through me. "Terrified, maybe. But you didn't look away. You didn't back down." He smiled slightly. It was refreshing. A tap on the window interrupted us. We turned to see Sophia standing at the French doors, her expression knowing as she signed through the glass. "Stop kissing in my garden and come in for dessert." I felt my cheeks flame with embarrassment, but Luca just laughed. A genuine, unguarded sound that made him seem years younger. "We've been summoned," he said, standing and offering me his hand. "And trust me, you don't want to miss my mother's tiramisu. It's legendary." I placed my hand in his, allowing him to pull me to my feet. As we walked back toward the warm light of the house, I was acutely aware of the crossroads I stood at. To my left lay the sensible path, maintaining distance from Luca and his world, accepting his help for my mother, but nothing more. To my right lay something unknown, potentially dangerous, but also vibrant with possibility. The choice should have been obvious. But as Luca's hand tightened around mine, as Sophia smiled at us from the doorway, I found myself stepping deliberately toward the unknown. 6 months later. "You're sure about this?" Liv asked, helping me pack the last of my clothes into a suitcase. "It's not too late to change your mind." I folded a sweater, Luca's cashmere one that had somehow become permanently mine, and placed it on top of the pile, I'm sure. So much had changed in half a year. My mother, after 3 months in Dr. Rossi's clinical trial, had shown dramatic improvement. The tumors had shrunk by over 60%, her energy returning in increments until she was strong enough to resume teaching part-time. She was currently in Florida, enjoying a 2-week cruise with her sister, a celebration of life I could never have imagined 6 months ago. And then there was Luca. Our relationship had developed slowly, deliberately, neither of us rushing what was growing between us. He had been patient, respectful of my boundaries, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. We'd spent countless evenings at Sophia's house, at quiet restaurants where we could talk for hours, at my mother's apartment playing cards and laughing as she regained her strength. I'd seen sides of him I never could have anticipated, his dry sense of humor, his fierce loyalty to those he cared about, his unexpected gentleness. I'd also glimpsed the harder edges of his world, the sudden phone calls that took him away at odd hours, the subtle security that always surrounded us, the deference people showed him that bordered on fear. Living with him is a big step, Liv persisted, concern evident in her voice, especially in that building, with those people. Those people are his family, I reminded her gently, and they've become important to me too. It was true. Sophia had become a second mother to me, teaching me to cook Italian dishes and improving my sign language immeasurably. Even some of Luca's associates, the ones who operated within legitimate businesses, had welcomed me with surprising warmth. I just worry, Liv admitted, about what happens if things don't work out. About what happens if they do. I understood her concern. Moving into Luca's penthouse apartment was more than just a change of address. It was a visible alignment with him, a step into his world that couldn't easily be undone. I know who he is, I said, zipping the suitcase closed. What he is. I've made my peace with it. That wasn't entirely true. There were aspects of Luca's business that I deliberately didn't examine too closely, lines I wasn't sure I could cross. But we had established boundaries. He never discussed certain matters with me, and I never asked. It was an imperfect solution, but it allowed us to build something real amid the complications. And school? Liv asked, changing tactics. You're still going back in the fall? I nodded. Already enrolled. Luca's helping with the schedule so I can continue working part-time at the hospital. I smiled slightly. Turns out dating the owner of half the city has some advantages. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Liv gave me a look that was equal parts resignation and affection. That's him, I guess, probably. I checked my watch. Precisely 7 o'clock, exactly when Luca had said he would arrive. His punctuality was something I could set my watch by. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark eyes softened as they met mine, the guarded expression he wore for the world melting away. Ready? He asked simply. I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the transition. This apartment, for all its shabbiness, had been my home for 3 years. Leaving it felt momentous. Luca sensed my hesitation, stepping forward to take my hand. We can wait, if you need more time, he said quietly. There's no rush. His willingness to accommodate my uncertainty only strengthened my resolve. No, I'm ready. Just saying goodbye. He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. After I hugged Liv, who gave Luca a pointed look that clearly communicated, take care of her or else, he picked up my suitcase with ease. I'll bring the car around while you take one last look, he offered, giving me the privacy he somehow knew I needed. When he was gone, Liv shook her head. I still can't believe Luca Ricci is being all considerate and patient. It's like finding out a shark enjoys classical music. I laughed. He's more than his reputation, Liv. I wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't. She sighed, then pulled me into another fierce hug. I know. Just be careful, okay? And remember, if you ever need to come back, for any reason at all, this is still your home too. I know, I whispered, blinking back unexpected tears. Thank you. Downstairs, Luca was waiting beside the car, Undino standing at a respectful distance. As I approached, Luca's expression grew concerned. "You're crying," he observed, reaching to brush away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. Having second thoughts, I shook my head, leaning into his touch. "No, just acknowledging the change. It's a big step." "It is," he agreed, his gaze holding mine. "But one I'm honored you're willing to take with me." The sincerity in his voice warmed me from the inside out. This was what Leave and others couldn't see. The man beneath the reputation, the vulnerability beneath the power. "Take me home," I said, the word feeling both foreign and right on my tongue. Luca smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "With pleasure." As we drove toward the waterfront district, toward the luxury high-rise that would now be my home, I thought about the night 6 months ago when Luca had first driven me home in this same car. I had been cold, wet, afraid, uncertain of him and of myself. Now, his hand rested comfortably in mine, his presence a reassurance rather than a threat. The city lights sparkled against the darkening sky, a familiar landscape seen from a new perspective. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges I couldn't yet imagine. A relationship that would undoubtedly be tested by the realities of Luca's world and my place within it. But as Luca's thumb traced gentle patterns against my palm, as the distance to our destination grew shorter with each passing minute, I found myself looking forward rather than back. Whatever came next, whatever complications, whatever joys, we would face it together. The car turned onto the waterfront boulevard, the Riviera building rising before us like a beacon against the night sky. "Home," I thought again, testing the word in my mind. "Second thoughts?" Luca asked quietly, watching me with those perceptive dark eyes. I shook my head, squeezing his hand. "No. Just thinking about how sometimes the most unexpected paths lead exactly where you're meant to be." His smile was soft, intimate, meant only for me. "My mother would say that's not coincidence, but fate." "And what do you say?" I asked. Luca brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against my knuckles with a tenderness that still surprised me after all these months. "I say I'm grateful, whatever you call it. Grateful that you spoke to my mother that night. Grateful that you gave me a chance despite everything you'd heard." His voice dropped lower, more intense. "Grateful that you saw me, really saw me, when most people only see what they fear." As the car pulled up to the entrance of the building, as the doorman hurried forward to greet us by name, I leaned across the space between us and kissed Luca softly. "I'm grateful too," I whispered against his lips, "for everything." And I was. Grateful for the unexpected turn my life had taken the night I signed with a deaf woman in an upscale restaurant. Grateful for the man who had noticed and been intrigued. Grateful even for the complications and contradictions that came with loving someone like Luca Ricci. As we stepped out of the car together, as Luca's hand found its familiar place at the small of my back, I knew with sudden clarity that this was where I belonged, not because fate had decreed it or because circumstances had forced it, but because I had chosen it, eyes open and heart willing. Whatever came next, we would face it together.